Most people thought Caitlin Clark's latest press conference was about one controversial play. But the biggest story wasn't the missed foul or the endless debate that followed. It was a quiet moment that revealed something far more important. After years of carrying the weight of an entire league on her shoulders, Clark finally admitted something she rarely lets anyone see. And by the time you hear everything she had to say, you may realize the real problem was never just what happened on the court.
Difficult. I think a lot of people sometimes think I'm a robot. I'm not a robot. I have emotions, I have feelings, and it can be really difficult to go through a lot of that. And, I'm 24 years old trying to navigate a lot, and I think at times...
There stood the biggest star in women's basketball, looking straight into a room full of reporters and reminding everyone of something that should never have needed saying in the first place. At just 24 years old, Caitlin Clark found herself explaining that she isn't some emotionless machine built to handle endless pressure. She's a real person, and everything happening around her affects her more than many people realize. The surprising part isn't that she finally said it out loud. The surprising part is what pushed her to that moment. And as this story unfolds, you'll see that the biggest reason wasn't the one dominating headlines across social media.
Let's probably start. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, and obviously I haven't been available for like a week or so. So, first of all, I know what you guys are going to ask, and I did think it was a flagrant foul, and our reffing just needs to be better. And it's tough. Obviously, the refs are in a really difficult spot. It's one of the hardest jobs in the world, in my opinion, is to...
To understand why this press conference mattered so much, you have to go back a few days earlier. Caitlin Clark had just absorbed another hard hit, one that many fans watching live believed deserved a flagrant foul. But the whistle never came. What happened next caught a lot of people off guard. Instead of criticizing the officials or fueling the growing outrage online, Clark took the opposite approach. She defended them. She reminded everyone that officiating is one of the toughest jobs in sports, where every decision is judged from every angle and someone is always unhappy. Coming from the player who took the contact, it was an incredibly measured response. But beneath that calm exterior was a message she has repeated time and time again. The physical play keeps escalating, the calls still aren't being made, and somehow she continues to be the player picking herself up off the floor. More importantly, she made it clear this wasn't about one isolated incident. In her eyes, it's part of a much bigger pattern that has been building for years. And that's where the conversation starts taking a completely different direction.
I think that she has the responsibility to. I think it's still a lot. It's unfair to put that on a player, but I have a lot less grace for it than I did in 2024, where I was like, hey, she just got here. There's so many people using her to, further agendas. She's a kid, blah, blah, blah. This is now 3 years into her career. And if she's silent, it's her decision to do so.
Long before Caitlin Clark stepped in front of the microphones, the internet had already decided what it expected her to say. One prominent basketball commentator argued that Clark needed to make a public statement, insisting that staying silent was no longer an option. The reasoning sounded convincing at first. If the face of the league says nothing, then that silence becomes part of the story. According to that view, Clark was no longer a rookie learning the ropes. She had become one of the most influential figures in women's basketball, and with that came the responsibility to publicly address everything happening around the league. On the surface, it's a fair argument, but there's one major problem with it. And once you hear Clark explain what has actually been happening behind the scenes, that entire narrative begins to fall apart.
Our players, in that regard, I don't really think that it was up for debate. Obviously, it wasn't called in real time. You go back and watch the clip. I think it's pretty straightforward. And it's kind of been a discussion for like 3 years now, and I think we really need to do a better job protecting the people in this league. And, obviously I've been involved in a few of those plays, but there's been plenty others across the league that, haven't got called, go back in post-game or whatever it is.
That's where Clark completely changes the conversation. She reminds everyone this isn't some brand new issue that suddenly appeared after one controversial game. According to her, it's been the same discussion for nearly 3 years. She even encouraged people to go back and watch the clips because the pattern is impossible to ignore. Every time a questionable play happens, the videos spread across social media. Fans debate them for a day or two. Coaches break them down after the game, and then everything goes right back to normal. The officiating doesn't change, the same physical plays continue, and the cycle simply repeats itself. Clark also made it clear that this isn't only happening to her. Players across the league have dealt with similar situations. Yet the conversation never seems to lead to meaningful action. That's why she pushed back against the idea that she had somehow stayed quiet. From her perspective, she's been raising these concerns for years. She even offered practical solutions, including better technology for officials, making referees full-time employees, and giving them the resources needed to improve consistency. Those aren't the words of someone avoiding the conversation. They're the words of someone who's tired of repeating the same message without seeing any real progress. That growing frustration becomes the key to understanding everything she says next.
I said before, like the harassment, the hate, none of that is okay. That goes for the opposing team we play, that goes for my teammates, that goes for my coaches. There should never be a question of character. Like I've always stood up here and said that, and that's truly what I believe. That's how I was raised. So, none.
Then came the moment so many people had been demanding. Caitlin Clark directly addressed the hateful behavior surrounding the league, and she didn't leave any room for confusion. She made it clear that harassment and personal attacks have no place in the game. But what stood out wasn't just what she condemned, it was who she chose to defend. Clark wasn't speaking only for herself. She included her teammates, her coaches, the players on opposing teams, and everyone connected to the league. She emphasized that nobody's character should be questioned simply because of what happens during a basketball game. That message carried much more weight than many people realized. For months, countless online arguments have been fought in Clark's name, with fans claiming they were protecting her while directing anger toward other players. Instead of encouraging that behavior, Clark did the exact opposite. She extended support to everyone involved, including the very opponents who have often found themselves targeted by people claiming to defend her. Rather than fueling another battle, she called for something much different, a chance for the constant hostility to finally slow down.
It's really interesting to me because, even I turned the TV on Sunday, and that game was on Wednesday, and that's all people are still talking about. And I feel like that's just a real disservice to our league. And I get it. You talk about it. You talk about whether it's flagrant. You talk about whatever it is.
The next part of her comments is where the frustration becomes impossible to hide. Clark explained that 4 days after the controversial play, she turned on the television expecting people to be talking about basketball. Instead, the exact same clip was still dominating every conversation. The games being played that night had almost disappeared from the headlines. Once again, one moment had become bigger than the sport itself. That's why she described the entire situation as a disservice to the league. And when you think about it, her point carries real weight. The WNBA has spent years fighting for national attention, larger audiences, and sold-out arenas. Much of that momentum has accelerated during Clark's arrival, bringing record television ratings and unprecedented interest to the league. But instead of that attention shining a spotlight on the basketball, it keeps getting pulled toward controversy. Outrage spreads faster than highlights ever could, and before long, incredible performances are buried beneath endless debates over a single replay. As Clark sees it, everyone loses in that situation, including the teammates who continue putting together outstanding performances while the conversation never moves beyond the latest controversy. And that's exactly the point she's about to make.
And for me, this is the opinion of Roz. I think it would be cool to hear from Kayla. I think she's a good person. I'm sure she's not at all, hoping these types of things happen to her fellow colleagues of the WNBA. I think it'd be cool if she was like, yo, don't do this.
Now let's go back to one of the biggest claims people kept making, that Caitlin Clark needed to finally speak out. Ironically, that very argument didn't hold up once people looked a little closer. The claim was eventually met with a community note because Clark had already addressed these issues multiple times before. She talked about them during her rookie season. She revisited them after last year ended. And now, she was simply repeating the same message once again. That's what makes this entire situation so fascinating. Many people framed this press conference as Clark finally breaking her silence. But the reality is she had never been silent at all. The real issue was that her previous comments didn't match what certain people wanted to hear. They weren't looking for balance or perspective. They wanted a stronger confrontation. And when they didn't get it, they acted as though she'd never spoken in the first place. Instead of listening to what she actually said, the conversation kept resetting itself, forcing Clark to answer the same questions over and over again. At some point, that stops becoming accountability and starts becoming an endless cycle with no clear way out.
It kind of goes back to a little bit of my frustration. I remember seeing a headline is and I don't remember who wrote this, and I try to stay away from social media as much as I can, but sometimes it can be hard. Like, I need to be aware of certain things, and obviously my team makes me aware of certain things, and it was like, the headline read like, "This season has been everything but fun," and they're just full of frustration for Clark and the Fever. And I'm like...
Then came perhaps the most revealing moment of the entire press conference. For a brief second, the polished public image disappeared, and people got a glimpse of how all of this has affected Clark personally. She mentioned seeing a headline claiming that this season had been nothing but frustration for both her and the Indiana Fever. Her response was simple, but incredibly powerful. She said nobody had ever asked her if that was actually true. The headline had already been written. The narrative had already been created. And somehow, her own voice was left out of the story completely. That's the reality she's been living with. A version of Caitlin Clark gets built by headlines, repeated across social media, and eventually accepted as fact before she even has the opportunity to speak. That's why she made one request that says everything about how she views the situation. Talk about her basketball. Analyze whether she played well or poorly. Criticize her decisions on the court if they're fair. But let the conversation revolve around the game instead of assigning emotions or opinions she never expressed. It's a remarkable perspective when you think about it. Most athletes hope the criticism dies down. Clark is asking for something entirely different. She isn't asking people to stop judging her. She's asking them to judge what she actually does on the basketball court instead of creating stories about who they think she is away from it.
We're playing the games those days, and also I feel bad for my teammates. They played on Friday, and they dominated, and they played really well, and nobody wanted to talk about that. They were just worried about everything else. So,
Clark didn't stop there. She pointed to something that perfectly illustrated why this entire situation has become so frustrating. Just days earlier, her teammates had delivered one of their strongest performances of the season. They played outstanding basketball, controlled the game, and gave fans plenty to celebrate. Yet almost nobody wanted to discuss what happened on the court. Every question, every headline, and nearly every conversation kept circling back to the same controversial incident. Clark admitted she genuinely felt bad for her teammates because their hard work was completely overshadowed. That wasn't some rehearsed public relations answer. It sounded like a franchise player who hated seeing the spotlight constantly pulled away from the people she's trying to win alongside. Ironically, many of the fans who claim they're standing up for Caitlin Clark may actually be drowning out the very team she wants everyone to notice. Instead of celebrating great basketball, the conversation keeps returning to controversy, and Clark believes that's hurting everyone involved.
That had already happened to that point. So, I think it's all of our jobs to help refocus the narratives a lot of the times, and we can do better at that. And
she took that idea even further by putting the situation into perspective. According to Clark, more than 10 other WNBA games had already been played while everyone remained fixated on one replay. Think about that for a second. Night after night, players across the league continued competing, producing memorable moments and delivering great performances, yet much of that basketball barely received any attention. But what stood out most was that Clark didn't place all the blame on the media. She included herself, her teammates, the fans, and everyone connected to the sport. In her view, changing the conversation is a shared responsibility. That's an unusually mature position during a controversy like this. Most people caught in the middle of a media storm point fingers everywhere else. Clark did the opposite. She acknowledged that everyone has a role in deciding what deserves attention and what doesn't. Whether you agree with her or not, it's hard to argue that she's looking for sympathy. She isn't asking anyone to rescue her. She's asking the entire basketball community to shift its focus back to the game itself before the endless drama becomes more important than the sport everyone claims to love.
Disservice to the other teams in this league and the other players in this league. There's so much amazing talent, and there's so many amazing players that are playing at an incredibly high rate. And I remember, I think it was Sunday or Saturday, whatever day that was.
Clark's message didn't end with herself. In fact, she widened the conversation even further by arguing that the constant obsession surrounding her has become unfair to the rest of the league. She pointed out that the WNBA is filled with elite talent, players putting together incredible performances every single night. Yet so much of that gets overlooked because every camera and every headline seems to find its way back to her. The irony is impossible to ignore. During this same stretch, Clark was named Eastern Conference Player of the Month after averaging around 22 points per game. shooting better than 45% from the field, and handing out more than 8 assists a night. Those aren't just impressive numbers. They place her among the league's elite guards. She's producing at an incredible level while dealing with relentless physical defense and nonstop media attention at the same time. Yet despite all of that, she's standing in front of reporters saying the spotlight shouldn't belong to her alone. That's not something you hear from many superstars. Most athletes embrace every bit of attention they can get. Clark, however, seemed far more interested in directing that attention toward the players sharing the court with her. No matter where you stand in the ongoing debate surrounding her career, that willingness to share the spotlight feels completely genuine.
For 4 years now, and you would never change any of it, but there are times that it is hard, and there are times that, it probably affects me a little bit more than I do put on, and, I would never change any of that for the world, but I think it's important that people do remember that part of it too. So, at the same time.
Beneath all the carefully chosen words and measured answers, there was one moment where Clark let people see the emotional weight she's been carrying. She reminded everyone that she's only 24 years old and still trying to navigate an overwhelming amount of pressure. Then she admitted something many people probably weren't expecting to hear. She said everything affects her more than she usually lets people see. That single sentence changes the way you hear the rest of her comments. For years, she's been expected to stay composed through every controversy. Some people demand that she speak out more often, while others criticize her whenever she does. She's been told to ignore the noise, rise above the criticism, and keep playing through constant physical contact that often goes unpunished. Through it all, she's maintained a calm public image. But in that brief moment, Clark acknowledged that keeping that composure comes with a price. The version fans see during interviews isn't the complete picture. Behind the confidence and professionalism is a young athlete quietly carrying expectations that very few people could truly understand. Far from showing weakness, it may have been the most honest statement she made during the entire press conference.
I'm thankful to be here in an organization that has my back and will always stand up for me. And, I think we can't ever lose sight of that. Like, the joy and the fire and the fun, that's why you play this.
There was, however, one part of Clark's press conference that stood out for a completely different reason. More than once, she made a point of saying that her organization has her back and that she knows they'll continue supporting her. What's interesting is that nobody in the room specifically asked whether her coaches or the franchise were standing behind her. She volunteered that reassurance on her own. Now, there are two very different ways to interpret that. The first is simple. She genuinely believes in the people around her and wanted to shut down any rumors before they gained more traction. The second possibility is a little more intriguing. Sometimes, when someone repeatedly addresses a question that nobody actually asked, it can suggest there's more happening beneath the surface than people realize. That doesn't automatically mean there's conflict behind closed doors, and it certainly isn't proof of anything. But it's one of those moments that naturally makes people pay closer attention. Rather than jumping to conclusions, it's probably best to file that comment away and watch how the rest of the season unfolds. Time will reveal far more than speculation ever could.
But I think just focusing on the joy and the amazing parts of this game, like I said, I think it's sometimes a disservice to not only our team, but to everybody else. And, let's get back to a lot more smiling and positivity. I think our world could use a lot of that.
After everything she discussed, the hard fouls, the missed whistles, the online hostility, the headlines written without her input, and the constant pressure to react the way everyone else wanted, Clark ended up delivering a message that almost sounded too simple. She said the world could use a little more positivity. At first glance, that might seem like a predictable or overly optimistic answer. But when you place it beside everything else she had just described, those words carry a completely different meaning. For years, she's watched controversy dominate conversations surrounding the league. She's seen how outrage overshadows great basketball, how it affects teammates, and how it creates endless divisions among fans. Instead of feeding that cycle, Clark appears to be making a conscious decision not to contribute to it. Whether people see that as naive or incredibly wise is up for debate. But from her perspective, responding with more anger would only make the situation worse. Maybe choosing not to fuel the fire isn't avoiding the fight at all. Maybe it's the only way to stop it from growing even larger.
But I'm feeling a lot better, excited to get back into practice today, and then feeling really, really positive about getting back into one of the games at the back-to-back. Obviously, difficult coming back in a back-to-back, so we'll have to be cautious of that. But I feel a lot better, and like I said, excited to get back into practice. And this week has been very helpful for my overall health. So,
as the press conference came to a close, one subject remained beyond debate: Caitlin Clark's health. It was officially confirmed that she would miss Sunday's matchup against the Las Vegas Aces, with hopes of returning during the upcoming back-to-back games against the Los Angeles Sparks and the Phoenix Mercury. Even then, Clark made it clear that no return would be rushed. She stressed that coming back during a back-to-back requires careful planning, especially after everything her body has already endured this season. That detail may seem small, but it ties directly into everything she's been talking about. If nothing changes about the way the game is being officiated or how player safety is handled, returning too soon could simply restart the same cycle all over again. And maybe that's the biggest question left hanging after this entire press conference. Was this the statement everyone had been waiting for? Did Clark finally say exactly what people wanted to hear? Or did she deliberately choose a different path by refusing to point fingers and escalate the conflict? That's where opinions are split, and honestly, there's a strong argument on both sides. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Caitlin Clark handled this situation the right way, or should she have been much more direct about everything that's happened? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Court Queens, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update as soon as it drops. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.